Hi, my name is Sabih, Ahmed, and I'm the Associate Director and Curator of Ishara Art Foundation. Ishara Art Foundation is a non-profit art organization that was founded in 2019 and is dedicated to presenting contemporary art of South Asia. And I'm delighted to welcome you to an exhibition walk of our ongoing exhibition titled Every Soiled Page. Every Soiled Page is an exhibition that is inspired from a poem by Faiz Ahmed Faiz. This is a poem that he wrote in 1953 while he was in prison and is titled Saragaz. Saragaz translates in English to a prelude to several poems to come. The exhibition features works from the Prabhakar Collection by 6 artists and a poet. The 6 artists included in the show are Anju Dhodia, Astha Butyl, Inder Salim, Neha Chokshi, Praneet Soy, and Sunil Padua. And the poem that I mentioned earlier is by Faiz Ahmed Faiz, generously granted permission by the Faiz Foundation Trust. The exhibition has been designed by my colleague Laura Metzler. I am the curator of the show, and there are many conversations that have gone into the making of this exhibition. Something remarkable about the poem by Faiz is that in 6 beautiful verses, he expresses how a poem becomes a song and a song becomes a heartbeat, which for us opened a whole bunch of questions that include, for instance, where does a poem begin? Does it begin on the page or does it begin before the page? And where does a poem end, if at all it ends? Does it end on the page, or does it end beyond the page? Our contention is that a poem begins before the page and ends beyond the page, which leads to a bigger question, that is, where does one begin reading? And as Faiz's poem itself describes, there's a moment that one has to begin reading every soiled page. And that every soiled page can be the earth, it can be rivers, it can be mountains, it can be trees. So the exhibition begins with a work by artist Praneet Soy titled Olive Tree 4. This is a work that was created in early 2020 and depicts one of the oldest trees in the world that is in Jerusalem. It's called Al-Badawi, which means the Bedouin, and it's a 4,000-year-old olive tree that he's depicted using silver point drawing technique. Silver point drawing technique predated graphite drawing, and it's a medium that has been used by some of the great masters of the Renaissance. What's peculiar about a silver point drawing is that just like any silverware, over time it tarnishes and becomes more radiant. So this drawing of the oldest tree in the world is actually going to get more radiant in the years to come. And we wanted to begin this exhibition with it because for us, the drawing is still completing itself. The poems are still writing themselves. The lines are still writing and drawing themselves. And maybe that's where we have to begin reading. And this paves the way into the exhibition with lines that are still drawing themselves, but also how do we read stains? How do we read perforations? How do we read crooked margins, disjointed lines? And how do we even read breaths? And here's the poem that I was mentioning earlier. We've presented both the Urdu version as well as the English version, translated by Sam Sucha, a friend of Faiz Ahmed Faiz. As the exhibition opens into more artworks that are presented here, we come across the works of Mumbai-based artist Anju Dhodia. We've presented a series of works by Anju in this exhibition, and the works behind me are part of a series titled Song of the Singular Beast. This is 3 of the elements of the larger series. Anju is an artist who often works autobiographically, and something quite special in this series of works is how it interrogates our relationship with stains. Because as Anju herself has quoted in interviews, we have to think about stains in a very important way, especially because our body is in a way always stained. We're never one color. And in a way, we're all like maps of places we don't know where. And perhaps as we meet more and more people, we're coming across more and more maps of places that are yet to be discovered, where sometimes those stains can be found up in the galaxies and sometimes in the proximity of the table cover on which someone has just had breakfast. And so where do we begin reading these stains can be all the way ranging from galaxies to the proximity of a table. Which brings us to the next work in the exhibition by Delhi-based artist Inder Salim, who is from Kashmir and has produced a newly commissioned artwork for this exhibition titled Every Page Soiled, a play with the title of the show, Every Soiled Page. What he's done with this work is to bring together works and poems that he's been writing for the past 20 years into one book. And in this book, he's perforated it, reminding you of the perforated bodies because of the military violence met out to civilians in Kashmir by the military. Something powerful that he says about these perforations in the book is that one may think that they may obliterate the voices, they may obliterate the words in this book. But also on the other hand, as the wind of this fan that he's installed passes through these perforations, you will have the first page come into direct contact with the last page. This work also is accompanied by a series of live performances that are recorded in Delhi every Saturday, where he reads and performs poems from this book in Delhi in different sites and presents them on the Ishara website. So what you have with the fan, the music stand, and the book is that there's a wind or a breeze that is blowing into the exhibitions through those pores, across works, across the visitors who come seeing the works. Next is a series of artworks by Neha Chokshi, who's an artist based in LA and Mumbai. And what we've presented of hers in this exhibition is a series titled Touching Integrity. This is a series comprising of 8 works, and we've presented 4, which has been executed in a rather complex way where she takes a print of a coniferous large tree across a certain area of the paper and then tilts it in order to have a different imprint, which is disjointed, which expresses something very powerful about an experience of disjointed time marked onto one surface. And the sense of disjointed time is what has been marked and mapped onto these surfaces through a tree. And the disjointed lines of this work continue into the next work that we look at by Mumbai-based artist Sunil Padua, who has created this artwork titled Imbricated Minutiae that he created in 2017, comprising of over 85 frames, most of them old used frames that he collects from flea markets, homes, wherever you find old thrown away wooden frames. And according to him, he's salvaging these frames because all of these frames also tell a story. It's not just the pictures inside them. Many of these frames actually at one point encapsulated very personal memories of people and now become the house for other stories brought together in this assemblage. Something very interesting that he mentioned about this work is that a number of these old wooden frames were in fact repurposed furniture. So a chair became a frame and now frames another chair. And like that, you might have several feedback loops and transformations encapsulated across these frames that are speaking to one another. One of the reasons that also interested us in this work is because of the crooked margins that you see. And these crooked margins remind you of crooked margins in a book of poems, because every poem has a set of crooked margins. One may think that those crooked margins are in fact just blank spaces, but if you look at it differently, in fact, each of those crooked margins are indicators of where you're supposed to pause and take a breath. So in a way, all of those crooked margins, all of those empty spaces are in fact saturated with breath and with meaning. Talking about crooked margins and pauses and breaths, we go to the next work, which is one of the most complex works for us to install by artist Astha Butyl, a Gurgaon-based artist who is obsessed with studying old scriptures, oral traditions, and ancient texts. The work by Astha that we presented in this exhibition is titled Turning Towards Pure White, a work that she executed between 2016 and 17, comprising of over 300 frames on MDF, stretched with cotton and fabric, framed again, and installed in this very complex way of every centimeter matching according to the precision of her design. What this work carries for her is a composition of memory patterns and breath patterns, because if you think about it, a lot of the texts, poems, and even ancient scriptures that we read are not just words that we're reading, but we're also reading the breaths and the rhythms in them. And therefore, the composition behind me is verses rendered into breaths, breaths rendered into frames. And in a way, each frame here stands for a breath. As you walk along, you could practically match breath patterns of the poems or verses that she's translated in this way. Something wonderful that happened during the course of this exhibition is that when visitors came with children, you could have children actually trying to map their breath along with this, almost performing with this work as if it were a musical score. The work also incorporates 2 black books that she created in this work, one of which is placed here, the other on a table, with which visitors can come and interact and write their thoughts as they come across this meditative work, sit on this table, and write and draw. Besides poetry being an important reference for this exhibition, another very important reference has been the breath itself. In a way, the breath has been a subtext to the show because in this present moment, our breaths have become one of the biggest threats to humanity, and yet it is the breath that is also the source of life. And we wanted to position this exhibition responding to this moment through breaths that connect us, through breaths that speak to each other, through breath that speaks to different times. Which brings us to the next series of works, again by Anju Dhodia, that comprise of 6 works that she did in 2014 of mixed media on paper, printed paper in fact. Much of this has been using existing botanical and biological drawings over which she's painted and drawn. These works somehow open up the relationship between hearing and touching, because what is hearing but a series of vibrations from one body touching another body? And other works that compel us to think about what if we were to regard dreaming and having nightmares also as a sense perception? What if we were to regard breathing as a sense perception and bleeding as a sense perception? All of which open a different understanding of how we engage with the world and how we engage with one another, because our senses are also connecting us depending on how we perceive them, depending on how we regard them. The work after this is also by Anju Dhodia, which is the largest painting in this exhibition, executed on fabric using charcoal and various media yet again. And this work is titled Shadow Lines, that she executed in 2018. This work curiously presents 2 figures wearing masks, just like the mask we're all wearing at this very moment, except the work was executed 2 years ago. This work is titled Shadow Lines, which is a reminder of a famous novel written in the 1980s by Amitav Ghosh, also called The Shadow Lines. In the novel, there was an interesting moment where the protagonist, in the middle of the partition between East and West Pakistan, takes a compass and draws how far the reach of violence went because of this one incident, in a way measuring the long shadow of history. Something that Anju's work makes us think about is how far does the light of history go? And therefore also asking us that while on the one hand you may have lines, shadow lines and lines on political maps that separate people, there are also other lines that perhaps connect people. Those lines may range from lines of light as much as they might be lines of poetry. So all the way back from the 4,000-year-old tree and the lines that are still drawing themselves on it, to the disjointed lines of the exhibition with Neha Chokshi's work, to the lines of breath and the lines of light that pass through Inder Salim's pages, to the crooked lines of Sunil Padua's work, and the shadow lines and the light lines that Anju talks about. All of these conversations are what went into the making of this exhibition. And these conversations range across artists who've participated in the show. And some of the most exciting kind of exchanges about poetry, about breath, about the ideas that I've shared here. There were many more ideas that also went into the making of the show. And if you're visiting, we'd love to take you around and do an exhibition walk and continue this dialogue. So thank you very much.